Well, hello everybody, and welcome to the post Monaco Tottenham Way podcast. I'm Marcus Buckland. I'm in the company of George Sessions, who is bright-eyed and bushy-tailed. Well, reasonably bright-eyed and bushy-tailed. He's actually at Gatwick Airport, having flown back last night from the Principality, where we saw Tottenham's first goalless draw in 125 games. Stretching back to March 2023, one man made it possible, and that, of course, was Vicario. What a terrific performance in goal to silence some of the critics that he's had to deal with of late. In truth, though, it was a concerning performance. Thomas Frank afterwards admitted that the Spurs players lacked intensity. Goodness knows why in the Champions League. Bottom line, played three, still to lose. Only once before have Spurs been unbeaten after their first three UCL games. That was in the 2017-18 campaign, but two draws means they're perhaps going to struggle now to finish in the automatic qualification positions, but more concerning the nature of the performance. And I mean, George, let's not beat around the bush. First of all, Thomas Frank admitting that there was a lack of intensity going forward. Spurs toothless again. Just how concerned were you by that performance?
Yeah, it's hard not to be concerned, isn't it? I don't want to go too overboard because I think this is Thomas Frank's 13th or 14th game, but it does feel like the team are going backwards, which is the big concern. The performances against, Man City and PSG, they were so good. You kind of think, why are we now at a point where it's going kind of, we're at a point where, was it 1 win in 5? None of the wingers are scoring. Kudus has got 1 goal. Odegaard's got no goals. Johnson's got 3, but can't get in the team. I think Spurs' top goal scorer his own goal, and I think at this point you want to be seeing those patterns of play. The kind of attacking creativity starting to marry up after obviously a very good start defensively, and then on top of that, defensively, we're now looking ropey. And as you said, thank God for Vicario last night, who I was a little bit critical of on Sunday against Aston Villa, but I thought the saves he made last night were outstanding. Particularly the two really really good ones from Balogun, the ex-Arsenal player, but the close range header I thought from Thilo Kerr, former West Ham centre back, that was a brilliant save. Some people will say it's straight at him, but if you watch the replay, he moves his hand up. The reflexes are so quick. If he doesn't move his hand up, he probably just parries it into the net and it's a goal. So yeah, really, really big performance from him, and I'm pleased because he is one of Tottenham's leaders, and with no Cuti Romero, you need the leaders to step up, and he certainly did last night.
Yeah, he did. I'll talk, or we'll talk in a moment more about this midfield issue that everyone's banging around the pivot of Polinia and Bentancur. My biggest concern is the complete lack of threat up front. Richarlison had another anonymous game. Just in terms of the actual starting 11, George, I mean, Porro obviously at right back in the absence of Romero. Danso, I think, is doing really well, actually, alongside Van de Ven. Archie Gray at left back, that was an interesting selection. You've got Bergvall, Polino and Pendica in midfield, and Odegaard, Kudus and Ritchie up front. I thought he'd given up on the idea of Archie Gray being a fullback. So what was the logic behind that selection?
Yeah, I'll be honest. When that team came out, there was the sort of British pack in the Stade Louis Stadium, and we were kind of like, what is this team? Is it 3-5-2? Is it kind of 4-3-3 with Mickey Van? We were thinking Mickey Van der Ven was actually left back, and we were all grimacing, thinking Mickey's played a lot of games. I know he plays there for the Netherlands, but when Cuti Romero's out, you don't then risk Mickey Van der Ven's hamstrings at left back. Certainly not left wing back. In hindsight, and sort of with the benefit of kind of the performance, I thought Archie Gray was actually one of the big positives last night. So, am I pleased he played left back? Not really. I think I would have played Jed Spence there against Magnus Akliouche, who I thought was outstanding last night. Albeit his best work was when he was in the middle. Actually, I thought Archie Gray handled him fairly well. So Archie Gray was a big positive, but surprised. I was frustrated after Bodo when he dropped João Palhinha, Mohamed Kudus, and Xavi Simons because Kudus and Palhinha have arguably been Spurs, two of Spurs' best two players this season. Well, actually, not arguably, they have been. And I just sort of thought he underestimated Bodo by doing that for the Premier League game against Wolves a few days later. And I just didn't understand why you wouldn't play Jed Spence in this game. And also, more importantly, why you wouldn't play Javi Simmons. I cannot fathom why Javi Simmons, who is clearly struggling for form, and we all know that, he's not in a good moment. He's 52 million, price tag over his head, 22-year-old, new country, been in the, played a handful of games for Spurs. It's obviously a settling in period. And in my mind, I always thought the Champions League games is where we're going to see the best of him, because the Premier League's so physical, so fast paced, so intense. It's hard for him to get on the ball and have that time that he's used to. But in the Champions League, you do get that time. You do get a little bit longer. And Monaco are a good team, but they've got a lot of injuries. They were quite fortunate to get a draw with Man City, and they've just sacked their manager, so they're clearly not in a good moment themselves. And their midfield pairing is a right back in Jordan Teze and a youngster in Mamadou Koulibaly. I think he's played 14 or 15 games. Put Javi Simmons against that midfield and let him run the game. And I didn't think Bergvall had his best game. So I'm frustrated with the João Paulinho and Rodrigo Bentancur, double pivot, but I can understand that in an away game, especially an away game in Europe. So I can't grumble with that on this occasion. But I just think, Wednesday night was a chance for Javi Simmons to get in form. And if he's poor on Wednesday night, then you drop him at Everton. I'm not sure Everton away is really the game for him. So to do it the other way around potentially, I really can understand that. So I was scratching my head quite a lot last night with the team selection.
I mean, I guess in defence of Thomas Frank, one of the criticisms we had of Ange Postecoglou last season in particular was that he kept playing the same 11, roughly the same 11. Injuries developed as a result of that, and Thomas Frank's he's got injuries to deal with already, so maybe he's just trying to be careful, particularly with Xavi Simmons, who had a tough, disappointing game against Villa, not to get him hurt. But you always say it's bingo time when you wait for his starting 11. But for me, it's when we're in possession, George, I'm not quite sure what we're trying to do. And a big thing has been made of Tottenham set pieces this season, and they have been effective from some of them. But I thought last night in particular, okay, we've got the Danso long throws, and you always think, oh, these are going to be a threat. I don't think one of them has actually looked to be a real threat so far against both Aston Villa and Monaco. And as for some of the free kicks, I mean, that one from Porro that sailed out of play. I mean, come on, if we're going to really look to be dangerous from set pieces, we've got to be better than that, haven't we?
It was a bad night for the set piece coach. Bless him. Yeah, I kind of think in a game like Wednesday night away to Monaco, set pieces can be the difference. And look, it's a big part of Thomas Frank's success, isn't it, over the last few years at Brentford, and absolutely fair play to him. He's really nailed down on that kind of facet of play. And Tottenham looked really good from set pieces, I thought, earlier in the season. Pedro Porro's delivery was really off. He had a poor night, I think, actually. His levels are so consistent, and we know he's arguably one of Spurs' biggest creators, isn't he? A right back. But he was off it, which doesn't help with the attack. I haven't had a chance to check this, but somebody messaged me saying João Paulinho and Rodrigo Bentancur didn't play one pass into Lucas Bergvall, who was a 10, which I haven't checked that. Maybe that's incorrect. But if that is the case, that's astounding. I mean, that makes me think, is it a tactic that Tottenham want to keep playing out wide and move, sort of build attacks down the wings? Tom Allnut, who giving away trade secrets, we did record this in the early hours of Thursday morning after the Monaco game, but it's failed to upload and process. So here we go again. Marcus is hearing me banging on about the same stuff and is probably going to fall asleep. But Tom Allnut, I said, Tom Allnut did a really good preview ahead of the Monaco game in the Times, and they had a graphic of the passes that João Paulinho, Rodrigo Bentancur, and Javi Simmons are making, and they're often sideways passes. And I remember Pierre Højbjerg being criticised for that. But it makes me think that maybe the game plan isn't to go through the middle, and it is actually to play out wide to Porro, to Jed Spence, to Destiny, to then get it forward to Wilson Odegaard, Mohamed Kudus. And I guess, in a defence of that kind of tactic, the ball's not sticking with Richarlison. The ball's not sticking with Matthias Tell. Spurs really missed Dominic Solanke's hold-up play. So maybe that is part of it, that instead of kind of going through the middle and getting it to Xavi or Lucas and then getting it through to Richarlison. They're thinking their best sort of avenue of attack is going out wide. But the last few games, that hasn't really worked. And I thought Kudos, he battled really hard last night, as he always does. But he looked a little bit jaded last night. And, we're going to come ahead to, Everton and sort of changes. I do wonder if it is time to give Brennan Johnson an opportunity on the right. I don't think he's obviously a bit of a Marmite player, but the two times he's come on in these last two games, the ball's fallen to him in the box. He fired over against Aston Villa, not the easiest chance, but it is an opportunity. And he had the one last night where if he'd scored it, it would have been the biggest smash and grab that Tottenham had for a long while. Unfortunately, hit the defender and was blocked. But the ball seems to kind of just be attracted to him in the area. And I sort of remember Ange's first season, 23-24, there was a beautiful purple patch where Richarlison couldn't stop scoring. And a lot of the goals were Porro out to Johnson and the first time cross from Johnson. And it would be Richarlison at the near post. I remember him scoring one against Everton like that at home. And I just think whilst the attack is so disjointed and so kind of sluggish at the minute, I would try and mix something up. Maybe you play Kudus as a 10 or you do just let him drop out ahead of a really big period. But I think Brennan Johnson, if things aren't going well in attack, and he's got 3 goals this season, which is more than all the other wingers put together, I think he is due a start. I think Thomas Frank's going to need to shuffle his back, and I think Johnson probably deserves an opportunity.
Yeah. As much as I do want to criticise Richarlison after his last couple of performances, I wonder maybe Sunday at Everton is an opportunity for him going back to one of his former clubs to just remind everybody as to what he can do. Have you seen enough? Obviously, we keep hoping that Solanke's going to come back, but we now know with Thomas Frank that what's a little knock can turn out to be a career-ending injury. But have you seen enough from Randall Kolo Muani? He's had 2 little cameo appearances. Reading a couple of reports this morning, I got the impression people quite like what they saw. I'm wondering if he's close to being ready to starting, and if so, he could make a bit of a difference, or a big difference over the next few weeks.
Yeah, he is really important now, especially with Solanke out. And I think that's kind of exasperated this issue with Richarlison, where he just feels sort of out of form now after quite a bright start to the season. It's because he's kind of pretty much been running to the ground. He's had the odd game where he's come out for tell, but he looks tired. And yeah, Kolo Muani wasn't on the pitch for very long. I think it was 10 minutes, wasn't it? He come on, but I don't know, actually it might have been longer, beg your pardon. But he did play a lovely ball through to Sarr for that Johnson chance. And I think it's just kind of his physicality and that kind of dynamism that Spurs are sort of lacking other than Kudos in the attacking areas. I think that could be, I think it's certainly going to be beneficial over the next sort of week to 10 days before the next international break. I don't think Kolo Muani is going to start at Everton. I can see him being penciled in to start at Newcastle, and if he scores a couple of goals there and gets Spurs through, it will quickly become a cult hero. But yeah, I think he's got a big role on Sunday to come off the bench, and I think there was glimpses there from him. You got to remember that he's had pretty much no pre-season. He'd signed for Spurs, was there for 2 weeks, then got the deadest of dead legs, and again has missed such a long period. He's not got that base fitness, but he got a little bit longer last night. He got a little cameo against Aston Villa. I imagine he'll probably come on around the hour mark at Everton, because Thomas Frank's substitutions seem to kind of be hour mark, 75 minutes, 80th minute, sort of 5 minutes to go. And hopefully if he can kind of keep building that fitness, he can be the option and the sort of dynamic forward that Spurs are really lacking at the minute, because it's a tough watch in attack, isn't it? It really is. And it is
really
early
is.
days, but it is a tough watch.
Yes, and if he doesn't make a mark, then I suspect that all this talk of Ivan Toney, which has started to circulate, might intensify as we head towards the January transfer window. In a moment, I'm going to ask you about one of the Monaco players that I know caught your eye last night, and you quite fancy him in a Spurs shirt. Just in terms of the overall situation then, George, in the Champions League. So 3 matches down, 5 to go. Spurs are currently 15th, 5 points from 3 games. Actually, only 1 point at the moment off an automatic place, but because 5 giants, I have to include Arsenal, unfortunately, in that, have won their first 3 matches, it's quite possible that you're going to need more points than last season to book one of those automatic positions. Coming up next, it's Copenhagen at home now. They are 32nd. They've only picked up 1 point. You'd like to think we'd win that. Then a trip to PSG, who just helped themselves to 7 goals a couple of nights ago, the defending champions, top of the table. So that's going to be brutal. Slavia Praha at home. Well, they're 28th. They've only picked up 2 points. So I'm thinking we're going to beat Copenhagen, we're going to lose to PSG, we're going to beat Slavia Praha. Huge game then against Borussia Dortmund, who are currently 6th with 7 points. And then we end the campaign at Eintracht Frankfurt, who are down in 22nd place. They've won one, they've lost two. All three of their games, incredibly, have finished 5-1. But looking at that realistically, do you think Spurs have already effectively, I don't want to say blown their chance, but missed out on a chance for an automatic qualification position?
I think it's going to be hard now, isn't it? I always I've been talking about this 16-point mark, and actually the way the top five clubs that you've mentioned have started with those 3 wins out of 9 points already, you kind of wonder could it be 17 this year? Could it be 18? And Spurs are on 5 points now. If they win 4 of their last 5, which I think if the squad's in a good shape and in the team's in a good shape, then I think they can do that. That's going to get them to 17. Maybe that will be the magic number. But it is a tough ask, because you're right. We expect them, and we'll be hugely disappointed if they don't beat Copenhagen before the international break, and Sparta Prague after the international break. I think PSG is going to be tough. I would fancy Spurs against Borussia Dortmund. I really would, if they're in a good moment. And look, Tottenham should go away to Frankfurt and win. They managed it last year. Frankfurt have lost players since then. Hugo Ekitike. So I think I would. Yeah, I would say Spurs can still get. They probably can still get top 8 if they can win 4 of the next 5 games. But it's sort of it looks easier on paper than it currently does in reality, doesn't it? But yeah, I think that's
Yeah.
kind of the Bodo point was why I was quite disappointed, because I really felt there's an opportunity there for Spurs to go to a team they've already beaten, and they kind of didn't grasp that. And then again last night, I thought, okay, well you've had your one opportunity, your one missed opportunity in Bodo, but if you win in Monaco, you have a little bit of cushion for these next 5 games. Maybe you can draw at home to Borussia Dortmund. The Spurs don't have a cushion now, so I think they're going to need 4 wins out of 5. I think they are capable of doing that, but they're going to need to be more ambitious and more bold, because that's sort of lacking at the minute.
And that's the accusation that is being leveled at Thomas Frank at the moment. I've seen a lot of report suggestions, George. Oh, he's a former Brentford manager. We've got the Brentford mediocrity. I think it's incredibly harsh to begin with. He did a fantastic job there. If you look at his first 13 games in charge, I think it's almost identical to Maurizio Pochettino, who, of course, was poised then to benefit from the emergence of Harry Kane. But let's bear in mind that, Frank is the first Spurs manager in a very long time not to have Kane, not to have Son, to be missing Madison, to be missing Kulusevski, to be missing Romero last night, to be missing Destiny Udogi. There are a couple of other players not there as well. Effectively, he's 3/4 of a team down. And I find it really hard and strange, George, that he is being criticised to the level that he is already. I know you were there last night, and sections of the away fans were booing the performance. And I think they've got every right to do that. You spend a lot of money, you go to an away game, you're expecting more. But I think in general terms, as we now look ahead to Everton, George, I really feel that Tottenham's supporters have got to be a bit more realistic, a bit more patient. For heaven's sakes, the man's just come in. He's only been there for 2 months. Why are some people already calling for him to be sacked? I think it's absolutely ridiculous.
I mean, spot on, Marcus. I think there's a real difference between criticising the decisions Thomas Frank is making, and saying Spurs aren't looking good, and calling for him to be sacked. Come on, we're not. I know we are in a football world and a football landscape where Ange Postecoglou is sacked after 8 games, but that shouldn't. We can't ever judge a manager in a matter of months. You really can't. Thomas Frank, at the very least, deserves this season. If we get to the end of the season, Spurs are 8th and they've crashed out the cups early, and you can't see any sign of progress. Maybe then, if the owners have got big ambitions and they feel it's not good enough for Tottenham, they make a change. But there's no way in any sort of stretch of imagination, even if this period goes wrong for him, and it could, because they're tough games, there's no way he should be sacked before Christmas or January, February. You have to give him time. And yeah, look, I sort of described it as a smattering of boos last night. It wasn't a really loud boos. I think actually the groans when Xavi Simons turned back and really halted the momentum of one move were more audible than the sort of boos. But it is a little bit of a concern that the away end, the hardcore group, have sort of watched that performance, not been happy with it, and let out some boos. But we shouldn't go overboard. You're absolutely right. He needs time, and look, we all know Mauricio Pochettino needed the Aston Villa result. He read it in his own book that he felt the kind of walls were closing in, and Harry Kane saved him with that winner. Off the top of my head, that was kind of end of November, wasn't it? I feel like November 23rd for some reason. I haven't got Wikipedia up to check quickly enough, but we're a whole month away from that. I know Nuno lasted. Thomas Frank's got about a week until he gets past the Nuno anniversary. But I think we all felt that Nuno was just the wrong fit, and it was a rushed appointment, and it was kind of the 6th or 7th choice in the end. And Spurs just needed a manager for the start of pre-season. It didn't matter who it was. There's a lot of reasons why Thomas Frank's been appointed. I wasn't kind of leading the Thomas Frank train in the summer. Certainly not, but you can see that he did an excellent job at Brentford. His Brentford team did attack well during that last season, and in the Championship they were very good as well. And he's big on data. He's got the link with Johan Langer. He's very good with young players. We have actually seen that some young players are slowly improving. The bar is low, but Wilson Odegaard's performances are kind of slowly improving. We want to see a lot more, admittedly, but they're slowly improving. Matthias Tell, we've seen a little bit. I really think Archie Gray in particular, I really think he's close to a big performance. And I mean that in midfield. And I would love to see him start. I don't want to sound like Kevin Keegan, but I would love to see him start at Newcastle and sort of dominate the midfield and just kind of show everyone I am ready to play midfield now. I don't need to be kind of, sort of mollycoddled. I'm ready. I can take control of midfield. But it's sort of going back to the original point. No, we can't. You've got to give Thomas Frank time. I know this is a frustrating period, and we want to see more, certainly from an attacking point of view. But he's not got a lot of time on the training ground. He really hasn't, and he's with about 10 players as well. Let's put that out there. Some of them have been injured for a long time. Some of them are not massively going to make an impact on the first team in terms of Kota Takaya. But we saw it last season with Ange. You take out Destiny Udogie, you take out Romero, you take out Solanke, you take out Maddison, Kulusevski. The team struggles. It's no surprise, really, that attacking-wise there is issues. And sort of part of the big problem for Thomas Frank is the Maddison replacement, Xavi Simons, has just not got going yet. But I do think, again, he needs time. Thomas Frank needs time. We don't need to be too overboard.
No, I'd agree. I mean, I think we are papering over the cracks to a large extent. I mean, last night, if Vicario hadn't been on form, Spurs could easily have lost 3 or 4-0. But listen, if you can grind out a point after a bad performance like that, that has to be a good thing. And Spurs have still only lost 2 matches under him. Everton next. Obviously, that was an Adir, one of many towards the end of last season at Goodison Park. I still shudder at the memory of that. We don't want to repeat of Spurs away fans booing at Goodison Park. So what sort of a team do you think Frank will ultimately go for? Do you think he's going to start hearing some of this criticism about being too defensive, etc., and respond in a crowd-pleasing way? Or is he simply not that type of manager?
I think he is quite, this is purely opinion, not based on anything I've been told. I think he is quite in tune with the general feeling around the club. He was so in tune with the Brentford fans and knew their frustrations and knew what they wanted. And I think he's clever enough, and he's got enough good people around him as well. Matty Wells is Tottenham through and through. He's been there so long. He's a big part of the coaching team, and there's other guys around the coaching setup, and obviously Vinay and Fabio and Paratici and Johan Langer. They're all gonna be knowing what the conversation is, what the kind of narrative is. It's a tough game, Everton. It really is. But you're right, Marcus. Spurs are still unbeaten, aren't they, away from home? That is where we have seen their best performances. It's kind of dipped the last couple with Monaco and Bodo, but admittedly they went to Leeds, and that was a really good performance. I thought that was gritty, steely, and Xavi Simons was good that day. And I imagine Xavi Simons will come back in if he didn't play last night, and Jed Spence will come back in. I think a big battle will be Jack Grealish against Pedro Porro. I do like Pedro Porro, but he's not the best defender in the world. If Desnu Doggy was fit, I'd imagine that Jed Spence would probably be put on that side, and he would be kind of given the task of locking down Jack Grealish. But the injuries mean it'll most likely be a Porro and Spence, and then a Mickey Van der Ven and Kevin Danso back four. I don't think Romero will be fit for this one. And then I guess midfield, it's tricky, isn't it? I mean, Pape Sarr's really sort of due a start. Maybe he comes in. He got some minutes last night. I'd be surprised if it isn't one of Paulinho and Bentancur, maybe both of them. And like I say, I think Brennan Johnson, I would play Brennan Johnson at right midfield and take Kudus out purely on the basis that he needs a rest. He had a big international break where it helped Ghana get through. And I'd love a Kudus and Kolo Muani sort of front three at Newcastle next midweek, because I've said so many times, as a Spurs fan, I want us to go for trophies. This squad knows how to win trophies, so let's really harness that kind of momentum that they built last season and go to Newcastle away and try and go for it. So yeah, I'd probably have Richarlison on the right. Richarlison down the middle, Brennan Johnson on the right, and I'd probably stick with Wilson Odobert on the left, because maybe not. I'm not as confident as I am with Archie Gray of exploding. I think Wilson Odobert is getting closer to a good performance. So that would be sort of somewhere my team. But I think it's important Spurs go there, put in the type of performance that we've become accustomed to away from home with Thomas Frank. Full-hearted, committed, dangerous on the transition. Solid defensively. That's what we want to see at Everton. It's not the sexiest thing in the world, but I think after this little period, they need to go to Everton and get a good result before that Newcastle game.
Yeah, I got the impression actually from Thomas Frank after the match last night that maybe Kudus is going to get a bit of a rest, because he noted what a threat he's been all season, but how he's played just about every minute of it. And perhaps it's not surprising that he's been slightly less effective against both Monaco and Aston Villa last weekend. You mentioned Jack Grealish, by the way. I mean, anyone who's listened to this pod for a while knows what a big fan I am of Grealish. Why the hell he's not in a Spurs shirt, I just don't know. It does my head in. But yeah, important to keep things going when you're not playing well. As long as you can get the results, then most people will remain relatively satisfied. Now, I did tease this as one Monaco player in particular, George, that if you were Tottenham's director of football, would be coming to North London in January. Tell us who it is and why you like him so much.
Yeah, Magnus Akliouche. I thought he was outstanding on Wednesday night. Other than Vicario, I really thought he was the best player on the pitch. He was demanding the ball. If he wasn't getting joy, against Archie Gray, when he was on the right wing, then he would move into the middle. He'd float out to the left. And he played a gorgeous ball into Balogun, who should have scored, but Vicario denied him in the first half. And you can see why Spurs were linked with him. As a kind of hybrid number 10, left winger, right winger. He ticks a lot of boxes. And I kind of, we actually asked him some questions on Tuesday. I went to the Monaco training ground, which is remarkable, by the way. Spurs have got an amazing facility at Hotspur Way, but boy, that Monaco training centre is incredible, just overlooking the coast in La Turbie. And yeah, you kind of got the impression with Magnus Akliouche that I think he fancies the Premier League. Maybe not January, maybe not next summer, but he was sort of asked about my colleague Rylan Taylor, who was filling in for Alistair Gold for Reach. He asked him about the Tottenham links, and Akliouche sort of said he was really flattered to be linked to Tottenham, but fully focused on Monaco and trying to do the best he can against Tottenham. But he did sort of say, Premier League in the future, yeah, why not? We'll see. And he's just, I know some fans will be like, oh, this is another one for potential. But actually, I think it's a little bit different. I wonder if this is kind of a Desiree Doué situation again. You've got a guy in Akliouche who's just got into the French senior team, played the last 3 seasons for Monaco, has got a lot of experience. He's becoming a leader for Monaco by all accounts. And I think Monaco kind of anticipated selling him in the summer. They were wanting around 60 to 70 million, and that bid never came in, and as a result, they've kind of struggled to rejuvenate their squad. And then their manager Adi Hüttler got sacked. So it wouldn't surprise me massively if next summer, Agliush will only have 2 years left on his deal, if he's sort of available for around that 50 million mark. And if I was Tottenham, and you want to build kind of a super squad, and you've got real competition in all areas, and there's, I guess, doubts over other players, Madison's fitness, I guess, coming back, Xavi Simons at the minute. I really would be looking at Magnus Aliush. And if listeners and viewers agree with me, then an email in the Tottenham Way pod at gmail.com, or sort of comment on X at the Tottenham Way. We're on Instagram. Marcus, you've just set up a brilliant TikTok account, I'm reliably informed. So yeah, if you're on TikTok, X, or Instagram, give us a follow and let me know if I'm talking rubbish about Magnus Agliush. He's another player with potential, but I honestly think he's potentially a real well-beater in the future.
Yeah, and be patient with the TikTok account, because having set it up, I've managed to lock myself out of it, but that will be up and running very smoothly in the next few days, I hope. All right, well, listen, George, I know you got about 3 hours sleep. You're still at the airport, so I'll let you get home, and then you can start doing some childcare. Busy time for George, busy, important time for Spurs, of course. So we go to Everton on Sunday, then we go to Newcastle in the League Cup the following Wednesday, then the small matter of Chelsea at home in the league, and then the next Champions League match at home to Copenhagen. In Frank, most of us still very much trust. Be patient, everybody, and come on, you Spurs.